Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. My name is Eric Schwartz. I'm the Dean of the Humphrey School, and I will have only a few very brief messages because we have other introducers this afternoon. First, let me say that we are delighted by this event. As the host, I think, of the country's only AFL-CIO chair, the Humphrey School seems to me has a deep interest in welcoming the head of the AFL-CIO. So this has been a kind of a 4 or 5 year quest for me, and we're delighted that it has finally worked out after a winter mishap last year. Not a mishap. This is what happens in March in Minnesota. So we're delighted by this event. I want to welcome all of our guests. I want to recognize and welcome our distinguished friend and supporter, Vice President Mondale, who's sitting in the middle. And I want to quickly turn the microphone over to the chair of the Humphrey School Advisory Council and my friend, Jack Thunheim.
Thank you very much, Eric. Good evening, everyone. It is a distinct honor for the Humphrey School to host President Trumka at the school this evening. Kyle Makarios will introduce President Trumka, but allow me just a moment to offer some comments on the importance of this event for this school. In 1983, in honor of Hubert Humphrey, the namesake of our school, the AFL-CIO made a very generous contribution to the Humphrey School to establish the AFL-CIO chair in labor policy. And as Eric mentioned, to our knowledge, this may be the only institution that hosts an AFL-CIO chair. It certainly is the only public affairs school to have this honor, and it is a very distinct honor. So whatever your political perspective might be, we can all agree that the chair, this incredibly generous gesture from the labor movement, is a very meaningful and honorable expression of appreciation to Hubert Humphrey for his deep commitment to ensure the economic well-being of all Americans. And we're also delighted that after President Trumka finishes his remarks, he will be joined on stage by Morris Kleiner, who is our AFL-CIO chair holder, who's done critically important work on labor and related issues, including significant research that he did that determined that certain NLRB penalties did not provide strong enough deterrence to employers for certain labor law violations by employers. Professor Kleiner is also a national authority on occupational regulation and research, and recommendations for which he is responsible have become the policy of the Obama administration. Prior to joining the Humphrey School, Professor Kleiner served as a labor management relations examiner for the NLRB and a consultant at the U.S. Department of Labor, and as a staff associate in employment policy at the Brookings Institution. He has a distinguished record. Again, after President Trumka's talk, Professor Kleiner will join us on stage, and he will moderate the discussion and take care of questions coming from the audience. For those of you who picked up an index card on your way in, please write down your questions and raise your hand during the discussion, and the staff will collect the cards, and hopefully we can address all of them. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Kyle Makarios. He is the political director at North Central State's Regional Council of Carpenters and he is an outstanding member of the Humphrey School Dean Advisory Council. Kyle?
Thank you, Judge Thunheim and Dean Schwartz. In his famous last speech to labor at the 1977 Minnesota AFL-CIO State Convention, Hubert Humphrey said, and I quote, "The story of the labor movement needs to be taught in every school in this land. America is a living testimonial to what free men and women, organized in free democratic trade unions, can do to make a better life. We ought to be proud of it." I think it's very fitting that the leader of the American labor movement can be here with us this evening to bring the perspective of the 12.5 million working people that the AFL-CIO represents to the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. Before introducing our speaker, I want to recognize some very special guests that are here with us tonight. We're joined by Minnesota AFL-CIO President Bill McCarthy. We're very proud to be joined by three former AFL-CIO state presidents, Danny Gustafson, Bernie Brommer, and Ray Waldron. And former Speaker of the House and retired Major General in the Minnesota National Guard and longtime friend of the labor movement, Harry Stephen, is here. Prior to his election as president of the AFL-CIO in 2009, Mr. Trumka served 14 years as its secretary and has devoted his career to improving workers' lives through a strong collective voice on the job. Richard Trumka is also admired for his leadership qualities, never shying away from a challenge and pouring his heart and soul into his work, a conviction that came early in his life. Rich grew up in a small coal mining town in Pennsylvania. Nearly all of the men in his family, including his father and grandfather, were coal miners. Richard followed them into the mines, working the midnight shift to put himself through Penn State and then Villanova University, law school. He once told his grandfather that he'd grow up to become a lawyer and stand up for workers' rights. In addition to his advocacy on labor and economic issues, Mr. Trumka has focused on corporate accountability and corporate reform, as well as reforms in immigration and sentencing, with the latter issue a major focus in recent years. Hubert Humphrey also said in his famous last speech to labor that the labor movement needed to become the idealistic conscience of American politics. I think you'll understand what Vice President Humphrey was talking about after you hear from our speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce Richard Trumka.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, to my brothers and sisters of Minnesota's powerful labor movement, to the students and visitors, and particularly my brothers and sisters of AFSCME Local 380, and my soon-to-be brothers and sisters from the faculty who made this event possible. And so many others at this great institution. Let me thank you for such a warm welcome. It's wonderful to be here. And let me just say to my good friend and to our Vice President, Fitz Mondale, Fitz, truly does my heart good to see you again, pal. It's wonderful to have you here. Thank you. And I'd also like to thank the four presidents of the Minnesota AFL-CIO. And please stand for just a quick moment and let everybody see you, Bill. And Ray, I know you're up there. Thank you, guys. Thanks very much. Thank you. And I also want to thank Kyle for your kind words of introduction and for your role here in the academic community. In fact, I got to tell you, you helped make Minnesota a model for how education and working people and also businesses and economic thinkers can work together for the common good of the country. I want to thank you for that. And of course, I want to recognize Maury Kleiner, who holds the prestigious AFL-CIO Chair in Labor Policy here at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. Maury, it's great to be with you. My brother, and thank you for all you do. All working people are honored by the work that you do. We appreciate it. And it is an understatement to say that we at the AFL-CIO are proud, very proud indeed, of our connection to the Humphrey School. We watch and we study your work, and we do that with very keen interest. Whether it's advancing early childhood education or partnering with the Minneapolis Federal Reserve to promote collective bargaining, or lifting up working people in the Twin Cities and around the region, I got to tell you, Dean, you've got a good thing going, and we hope it continues for a long, long time. And quite frankly, as workers and as a country, we need there to be a lot going on. And by we, I mean all working people in America, union, non-union, and never heard of union. By we, I mean everyone whose life would change dramatically for the worse if we lost our paychecks. You see, some people don't need to work a day in their life. We don't need to worry about them. They're doing just great, and they'll continue to do just great. But the situation isn't so hot for the rest of us. And that's got to change. And it will change, quite frankly, because we're going to change it. But let me hold on to that for just a moment. I got to get out of my prepared remarks so I can say something about the tragic death of Jamar Clark this past weekend. You know, I want to express our deep solidarity and our heartfelt sympathy for everyone involved, especially Mr. Clark's family. And I also want to restate the AFL-CIO's commitment to finding a way forward with our Labor Commission on Racial and Economic Justice. America can and will respect and honor black lives and lift up and respect all working people, including hardworking public safety workers. It's not one or the other. We don't have to choose between one or the other. Now, let me also say, if you want to join our labor movement, or if you want to do more to help us find a path towards justice and raising wages, go online to workingamerica.org. That's one word, all spelled out, workingamerica.org, and you can join. Working America is the AFL-CIO's community affiliate, and it's a powerful instrument for progress here in Minnesota with over 200,000 members and growing every day in this state. Now, here at the Humphrey School, you concern yourselves with progress. You concern yourselves with solutions. And I'm eager to hear from you, hear your ideas, and hear your thoughts and everything. I should also mention the hard work and creative political advocacy of the AFL-CIO Secretary-Treasurer Liz Schuler. Maybe some of you have met her, especially the young workers that are here. She's taken the lead with them. A few weeks ago, Liz gave a very, very powerful speech on issues affecting working women and the whole of American society. And this week, she's working jointly with Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts on finding ways to advance these important policies. And that gets me to an important subject. Because politics are important. But so are the political routes to enacting them. Policies are important, but how we get there is just important. We can't simply talk about our ideas. We have to address the political hurdles that we face, because there are a lot of them. Tough hurdles, high hurdles, unrelenting hurdles. You see, some people don't embrace our value of a full and democratic society based on broadly shared prosperity. And I'm talking about the 1% who have used every political and economic tool to drive down wages and to divide working people. And trust me when I tell you, they aren't finished. They're still coming after each and every one of us who counts on a paycheck to live. So what I'm going to talk about are tools, about unity, about activism, and about the collective voice, and how we can use those to surpass the hurdles that we face today, as well as those that we'll face in the future. See, Hubert Humphrey talked about the test that we have to set for ourselves. Not to march alone, but to march in such a way that others will wish to join us. That was his test. Now, that's a founding principle of unity. And we see it working today in the rise of the collective voice in America. We see it in the rising collective voice right here at the University of Minnesota, where workers are negotiating together for better wages, and where the faculty is coming together to get a voice, to make stronger educational policy, where workers are sitting across from managers to win fair pay and fair benefits and a secure retirement. See, in fact, brothers and sisters, this year, 5 million union workers all across America are bargaining contracts. This is our biggest year for collective bargaining in modern history. In fact, in our nation's history. All of us helped our employers to pull through the hard times. Now that the worst of the recession is behind us, we want our fair share. A fair share of the wealth that we helped produce. So in the first 6 months of this year alone, working people in all kinds of jobs have won a pay increase on average of 4.3%. And we won it the old-fashioned way, by standing in solidarity with our brothers and sisters for it. And that's not all. 2015 has been the biggest year for raising non-union wages in recent history, through both grassroots activism and electoral politics. We've seen higher minimum wages all across the country. Right here in the Twin Cities, you've got a powerful and growing campaign for a $15 minimum wage, and we think that's fantastic, and we know it's going to happen. A half a dozen cities are on track toward a $15 minimum wage, joining another half dozen major cities that have already voted it in. And for the first time in history, federal legislation was proposed at the same level. See, this spring, 2 million retail workers stood together, and they won raises from Walmart and Target and Marshalls and TJ Maxx. And when IKEA raised wages earlier this year, the results were so good, they raised them a second time. Now, just last week, workers at IKEA in Massachusetts went on strike for union recognition so that they could bargain for even better wages. See, our work raising wages has opened millions of eyes. People now see some hope. We see solutions. We see a path toward a better future. Raising wages is how we lift up our families and how we lift up our communities. And raising wages will kickstart the greatest engine of economic growth that the world has ever seen. And that's a well-paid American workforce. And yet, we face a very complex political landscape. A landscape highlighted by the tragedies and protests that have rocked the Twin Cities for the past few days, rocked our nation for years, and the lives of black people in America for far, far, far too long. See? To shed light on that dynamic, I want to tell you a story. This comes from the United Packing House Workers of America, the men and women who turned cattle and pigs into beef and pork. See, like most of America, just a few short generations ago, packing house workers were divided by race. The term was a Jim Crow local. And let me ask you, does anybody here know what a Jim Crow local is? Would you raise your hand? Just a few. Well, for those of you who don't, I want to explain. See, it meant that there were two locals, side by side, in the same plant. A black local and a white local. Separate and unequal. And in one instance, the white local earned a nickel more an hour. A nickel. And when business slowed, of course, the black workers were first to get laid off. Now, on first blush, it might seem the white local had it good. After all, they got a nickel more an hour. And they had layoff preference. But the truth is, they were struggling hard too. Struggling hard to earn enough to raise families and to have a decent life. Because those were hard jobs, dangerous jobs. And they didn't pay a whole lot more money. So at the bargaining table, every time the white union got tough, the managers would tell them to go ahead and strike. You see, those managers had confidence in the divisive power of that nickel. Those managers were confident that enough black workers would cross the picket line to keep the plant gates open. And that threat never failed. Never failed to bring the white local to heel. And then, after the white local settled for a pittance, the black local got the same deal, only a little worse. A nickel less. Now, I want you to think about how powerful that nickel was. How it kept the white families in poverty and the black families broke. And yet, instead of standing in unity, the whites jealously guarded that nickel because it wasn't much, but it was something. And they were scared to lose it. They justified it. And you can bet that the black workers resented it terribly every single day. And then, and by the way, this is a true story, and then the black workers convinced a few white workers that the nickel wasn't really a bonus, but it was a foot on the necks of all the workers, black and white. And as long as that nickel divided them, the workers couldn't stand together. And so finally, the white local voted down the nickel, and they dissolved the two-tier system into one. And both groups bargained together. And guess what? All the workers won twice that nickel for everybody, fair and square. You see, those packing workers learned the meaning of unity. They understood it, and they lived it. They looked at the big picture and saw what was really dividing them. And they faced it, and they dissolved it. And if you think it was easy for the white local to give up that nickel to join the black workers on faith alone, I'd ask you to think again. Because it took courage. And it took trust. Now, our country, America, needs that same unity today. The same courage and the same trust. Because right now we're divided left, right, and center. And the latest attempt to divide us has made its way to the Supreme Court. It's a case called Friedrichs versus California Teachers Association that threatens to weaken the rights of teachers and nurses and other public employees. And the corporate right wing wants to pit public workers against private workers. But this time we're not going to let them. See, just like those workers, just like those workers in the Jim Crow locals, the differences between us are illusions. But illusions that can create real pain and real suffering. And it's in these illusions that the right wing is quick to take advantage of. You see, cynical and hateful politicians like Donald Trump play on our fears that we can lose what little we have. That's why they target immigrants, women, and people of color, and public workers, and union workers, and you name it. They're sophisticated when it comes to using fear and division. They're sophisticated and ruthless, but they can be beat because we can beat them with the same type of unity that those packing house workers exhibited. But it takes courage, and it takes trust, and it takes a little bit of faith in solidarity. See, the truth is America does better when we all do better. But to get there, we really do all have to stand together. See, we'll stand with teachers and taxi cab drivers and meat packers and everyone else who works for a living. We'll stand with Black Lives Matters and with police officers on the beat because we're all brothers and we're all sisters. We'll stand with unemployed veterans and immigrants who want a better life, but who get cheated out of wages and are used to drive down all of our wages. There's that nickel again. See, we'll stand, really stand, shoulder to shoulder on picket lines, your picket line and my picket line. We'll stand together when it's bright and sunny, but most importantly, we'll stand together when it's hard and when it's raining and when it's cold and when it's dark and when it seems like only we stand alone. That's when we need to stand together the most. See, there's one way for workers to win, and it's together. Together for as long as it takes to win what we need in America. And that's good pay, good benefits, a better life, and a secure retirement. Now, all across America right now, working people are building political power. And as president of the AFL-CIO, it's my honor to stand with those workers. But don't for a minute think that we are, or would claim to be, the master of this movement. Because it's big and it's powerful and it's an honest-to-God groundswell. There are thousands of little groundswells growing up right now where workers come together and ask for a better life and stand together to get that better life. The same type of groundswell that created industrial unionism in America nearly a century ago, and that won so many civil rights victories just a few generations later. And yet, our corporate opponents have political power too. I'd proffer that it's declining, but it's still powerful. Like a dinosaur that's lived past its time, it's big and it's vicious, but quite frankly, their notion that only the top 1% should benefit from this country and this economy is about to be pushed into extinction. And as we go forward with our campaigns to raise wages and for other good policies, and even as we fight bad policies like destructive Wall Street trade bills full of corporate entitlements, President Obama and the Wall Street and Washington elite are trying to push through the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's a big test. It's a big test because the TPP is a symbol of everything that I've been talking about. It's a test about who will write the rules, the economic rules in America. Because for years, they've tried to convince us that the economy's like the weather. There's nothing you can do about it. So just go along with it. Accept it. You're like a grain of sand on the beach. You get washed back and forth. But the economy isn't like the weather. The economy is nothing but a set of rules. Those rules are made and written by the men and women that we elect. Those rules decide the winners and the losers. And for nearly 4 generations, those rules have been written for us to be the losers. See, working people are sick and tired of bad trade deals that rip apart the fabric of our country. We've seen the shuttered factories, the dying towns. We've talked to the workers who have lost everything only to be told that they should retrain in another field for half the pay. See, less than 2 weeks ago, after 6 long years, the Obama administration finally released the text of the TPP. It'll hurt all of us who depend on a paycheck to survive. It will drive down wages, kill jobs, give corporations special rights, hurt consumers, and jeopardize the public health. But none of us should forget that the damage doesn't stop there. You see, by destroying jobs, the TPP will further ruin America's tax base. And that'll bring more trouble to great public institutions like the very one that we're standing in here tonight. So we intend to end the era of disastrous trade deals, and we intend to end it now. And I want you to join our coalition. Every student, every senior, every worker, because we are going to fight like hell against the TPP and killed this bad trade deal once and for all. See? And we've been reaching out and building a winning coalition, a coalition that's strong enough to beat back bad policies like the TPP and respond to Friedrichs and other attacks on our freedom, to lift up our jobs and our communities. We know our opponents will try to find ways to divide us, metaphorical nickels, if you will. But we also know how to call out division for what it is, and then to encourage us to stand together. Economic inequality in America is bad, even as our economy produces more wealth than any nation ever in history. We are the richest nation at our most rich point in time. We have to decide priorities and how that wealth will be applied. Should it be applied so every kid can get a quality education? Every family can have quality health care? Every worker can retire with some dignity? Or will we continue on where the vast majority of that wealth goes to the top 1%? See, we intend to build a coalition strong enough to put together the policy components of the right deal. One that can raise wages, one that can bring us a new day and a bright future for everyone who works for a living. So join us, stand with us, fight with us, vote with us, win for Minnesota, win for our economy, win for our country, win for our kids and their kids, but most of all, win for America. Thank you.
Well, thank you, President Trumka, for those very inspiring words and the vision for the future for the labor movement. I'm Morris Kleiner, and I'm the AFL-CIO chair. Just as a brief background on the history of the chair, I feel very honored to have this chair, and largely because the way the funds were raised. Lane Kirkland and Doug Frazier, who were involved in the raising of the funds for the chair, went to each of the AFL-CIO members at the time, taxed each member, and said, this is a way we want to honor Hubert Humphrey from the labor movement for the inspiring work that he did and all the work that he did over his career. So it's a real honor for me to know that each member of the AFL-CIO made a contribution to this chair. So thank you. And also want to note, as a result of the chair, there really have been thousands of students at the University of Minnesota, both at the Humphrey School and at what was the Center for Work and Organizations, have been able to take classes that have focused on the labor movement, learn about the labor movement, what it does and its positions, and how the labor movement plays in the economy. And also it's resulted in lots of work and research that has really shaped much of the agenda in terms of the academic research. And that's what I'm going to be sort of focusing on, is how the research has developed and perhaps thrown some light on some of the key issues. And I want to perhaps dig a little bit deeper in the moments that I have to talk about this. And one of the issues that you mentioned was certainly the issue of income inequality. And since I've come to the Humphrey School in the late 1980s, income inequality has grown. And one of my co-authors, who served as chair of President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors, wrote in 2002 that the rise in inequality in the United States over the past 3 decades has reached the point that inequality in incomes is causing an unhealthy division in opportunities and is a threat to our economic growth. Restoring a greater degree of fairness to the job market would be good for business, good for the economy, and good for the country. My question is, what is the labor movement doing? And you've addressed some of these, but specifically, what is the labor movement doing to reduce some of this inequality that has been rising over time?
Or if you wouldn't mind, I'll just drop back and sort of frame the question. In this country from 1946 to 1973, productivity doubled and so did wages. And the interesting thing about that period of time is the people in the bottom 2 quartiles wages were raising faster than the people at the top, so the wage gap was lowering. It was coming together, and the middle class was born. At that time, the labor movement represented 35 to 40% of the workforce, so we drove wages in an entire industry. When a union mill got a raise, the non-union workers got a raise as well because we drove wages for everybody. From 73 to date, productivity has continued to rise, but wages have stagnated. That's for a lot of different policies. Some of it, Volcker announcing that he would no longer concern himself with full employment, but only fight inflation. So there was a slow growth policy that affected all of us. The attacks on working people started with relentlessness. And now we represent about 12.5% of the workforce, and so we don't drive wages the way we did. And those wages continue to go down. So the lack of union density brought about by an unrelenting war by employers and corporate America to destroy the labor movement, weak labor laws that are sort of the joke of the world, the rest of the civilized world. Our laws are nothing. Your studies that showed that the penalties for violating the labor law were a pittance and no deterrence at all. All of those things have come together to weaken the leverage and the bargaining power of working people. And as long as working people don't have power, they're not going to be able to get a wage increase or raises. Now, why is that important? Well, 72% of our economy is driven by consumer spending. If workers don't have money in their pocket, they can't spend. If they don't spend, they can't create demand. If they don't create demand, the economy limps along, like you've been seeing it for the last couple of decades. And so what we've done is we've adopted, we realized, first of all, that we are too small to be able to change the rules of the economy alone. So we went out to all of our progressive friends in the communities. Before our last convention, we invited them in. They sat on our convention committees, never been done before. We had them deliberate with us. We had them talk with us. We planned with us. And then we took them to the convention with us. And they actually deliberated at the convention and participated in it so that the issues wouldn't be my issues or your issues, but they would be our issues. We continue to form strategic partnerships with all of our progressive friends and allies so that we do have the mass and the power to change the rules. The second thing we did is we adopted an analysis of the economy called common sense economics that tells you, tells workers precisely how we got here. And it debunks the myth that the economy's like the weather and there's nothing you can do about it. It destroys that myth. It shows how neoliberalism was used to put us and workers in the position that we're in and defang workers and empower corporate America. And then we have a policy prescription out of that, a very large policy prescription that goes into 3 buckets. One is democracy, defending democracy, because people that we elect set the rules. If you change the amount of time that people have to vote, you eliminate early voting, you make them have all kinds of identifications before they can vote. You reduce the number of people that can vote, and you limit democracy. That's one bucket. The other bucket is the rules of the economy, and the third is how we execute them. We then adopted an agenda called Raising Wages Agenda. And it's not just about the minimum wage or about wages, our wages. It includes a multitude of things. Equal pay for women who earn 74 cents on a dollar right now instead of $1 on a dollar. They get cheated out of 26 cents out of every dollar that they earned. It includes taking care of comprehensive immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship so that 11.5 million undocumented workers can't be cheated out of wages, made to work in unsafe conditions, and then used to drive down the wages of everybody else. It includes Black Lives Matter. It includes sick days. It includes fair scheduling. All of those things that come together to set the standard of the living are covered under the Raising Wages Agenda, and we're pursuing it. We're pursuing it right here in Minneapolis and St. Paul with a real vigor, trying to improve the standard of living for everybody so that we can benefit the economy and grow the economy and create jobs so that we all have a place to work and some decency in our lives.
Great. Very good. And just an intellectual background. There was an economist here who won the Nobel Prize, Leo Hurwitz, who his whole focus of his work was that rules matter, and that who sets the rules really gets the rents in society.
We've worked with Joe Stiglitz right now, and we produced a large book on a policy prescription out here, and it's called Rewriting the Rules. Exactly what we want people to understand, that the rules make a difference and we can rewrite them. If all of us come together and demand different rules, we can get there.
Just going back to some work that I've done with Richard Freeman and Joel Rogers, who's next door at Wisconsin, really documenting the work that you mentioned, is that remedies under the National Labor Relations Act and the fact that the rules really have resulted in a decline in union organizing and the likelihood of union wins. In fact, the former AFL-CIO president, Lane Kirkland, was quoted in the Wall Street Journal, who called for the repeal of the whole act as amended, saying labor could do better without the provisions of the NLRA. That going back to, as it was termed, the law of the economic jungle.
Yeah.
What do you think about your predecessor's view of the NLRA?
Well, I think he was absolutely right. I think it was a cadaver for a long time. I mean, it was defunded under Republican administrations and made to be useless. It was a toothless tiger that didn't enforce the law, even if it wanted to. And the laws that it had were so weak that it didn't matter. I mean, all they do is slap your wrist. You have an organizing drive, they illegally fire somebody, they have to post a notice saying, we won't do it again. And it may take you 7 years to get your job back. And when you get your job back, any interim earnings you had gets deducted from what they owe you. I mean, it's ridiculous. By the way, we just introduced a bill that would increase the penalties. And we're pushing that bill forward now, trying to reform the penalties of the NLRB and the prescriptions of the NLRB. But let me tell you one other thing that most people don't know this. The International Labor Organization, the ILO, has adopted 180 some resolutions. They deal with child labor, they deal with prison labor, they deal with the freedom of association, the right to bargain collectively. And they say what the minimum standard worldwide should be. Guess whose country hasn't adopted any of the resolutions dealing with freedom of association or collective bargaining? The good old USA. While we lecture other countries about not treating their workers right, we haven't even adopted those resolutions ourselves. It's disgraceful. And as a result, it really diminishes our moral authority worldwide when we point a finger at somebody else. It reminds me of my 8th grade teacher. She said, anytime you point a finger at somebody, there's always 3 pointing back at you. And that's sort of what it reminds me of with us.
Given the political and economic context, what can unions do to rebound? You mentioned the peak of the labor movement in the 1950s when 1 out of 3 workers were represented or were members of a union. You mentioned some of the things that you're doing, but what do you think unions can do to rebound and represent more working people?
Well, the first thing I think we have to do is try new things. Don't be afraid to experiment. Try it. If it works, we keep it. If it doesn't, try something else. I think we've been too mired back. We've been too tied up in what we used to do, and we wouldn't do anything. Take young people. Well, when I became president of the AFL-CIO, we started looking at young people because for a couple of generations, we'd let them get away from us. And what would happen is we'd go to young people and we would say, here, come and join us. And they would say, yeah, you guys are nice guys and I like the labor movement, but you really can't help me. I got 3 jobs, 3 employers in the same day. And we would go, yeah, we know, but come and join us anyway. So we tried to fit their needs into our square peg. Now we do it differently. We go to young people and we say, what do you need us to be? What do you need us to do to help you? And we try to change ourselves to meet their needs instead of trying to shoehorn them into what we already have. So that's one thing we can do. We can encourage all the green sprouts and the little fires that are going up out there, the $15 an hour campaign, domestic workers trying to organize, independent contractors trying to organize, day laborers trying to organize, faculty members trying to organize, all of those things we can encourage and support, but not do what we used to do. The old AFL-CIO, the old labor movement, we used to try to smother them. If we couldn't control them, we didn't want to have anything to deal with them. Right now, I think all we do is give them some water and some nourishment and some encouragement and all the support that we can and help them grow because we're all getting better. And then we have Working America. Working America is our community group. Let me tell you what we do. We go out into working class in neighborhoods and we go to no union household. We go to non-union households, we knock on the door, and we say, hey, how's it going? How's the economy treating you? You like the way things are going? Most people say no, because the neighborhoods we're in don't have a Mercedes or a Jaguar in front. And we say, here's what we stand for. Would you like to join us? 2 out of every 3 doors that we knock on join us. Working America has about 3.5 million members. And here's the beauty of it. We find out what issues are important to them, what they're concerned about, and we give them information, we educate them on those, and then come election time, we mobilize them. And in the last election, our Working America members who become associate members of the AFL-CIO voted 1 percentage point better for Barack Obama than our active members did, 76 to 75. And these are people that call themselves born-again Christians, ardent Second Amendment rights, but when we give them economic training and education, economics, their personal economics, trumps the other issues. And we're doing that. We're moving along. We have 200,000 of those members here in Minnesota. We have 900,000 members in Ohio. We have 675,000 Working American members in Pennsylvania. And we're growing it all the time. So we're doing all of those things to grow. We're encouraging workers to organize and to move up on their own, and we're not trying to smother them. And we're trying to be as innovative and creative as we can, adopt and change and figure out what works.
Very good. You mentioned in your remarks and some of the work I've done on the public sector, again with Joel Rogers and Richard Freeman on the forthcoming Supreme Court case, Friedrichs versus the California teachers. How do you see that case, and given the really bright spot of the labor movement, especially since the old days when George Meany said there's no way you can organize public sector unions, to now more public sector union members than private sector?
It's about evenly divided right now, both ways. But here's what Friedrichs is all about. Most people don't know this, but public sector employers either have to have the authority from the state, the county, or the local area that has to give them the authority to bargain. They don't have any bargaining rights because they're independent. So they get that right. And it's in like a right to work state. How'd you like to have a business like this? We go into a right to work state, and people in a workplace don't belong to the union. But I have to give them everything that I have to give to my members. I have to represent them. I have to give them all the benefits, even though they're not members. So what we were able to do is create a thing called fair share, that they have to pay a fair share for the services that we provide them. Justice Alito last year, in a dissent, begged the right wing to file a case to attack fair share. That's the Friedrichs case. So that if they're successful at the Supreme Court, we'll have to give them all the services, but we can't collect anything from them. I mean, if anything was ever undemocratic and unfair, that seems like it's it to me. We're going to fight it. We have a number of governors, a number of mayors that have joined in with us, writing amicus briefs, saying this is bad, it'll hurt us, it'll hurt our community. We like collective bargaining. It allows us to get everything together and work more effectively with our employees. If Friedrichs goes the wrong way, what will happen is it will be the same thing as a national right to work law for public employees. And then the private employees, if you work in a private industry out there, you shouldn't feel too smug about this only applying to public employees, because trust me, we'll be next. That'll come down the line with us. So it's yet another attack that was actually solicited by a sitting justice on the Supreme Court, Alito, the same guy who said they are against activist judges.
You've mentioned the important role that unions play in wage inequality, but another area that unions play a huge role is in providing working people with a voice. That is, a voice at the workplace and a voice in society. How do you see that? How do you see the labor movement, given that the decline of the labor movement over time, in getting that voice and representing workers, both union and non-union, which you alluded to in your remarks?
Well, that's why we have partnered with Progressive Allies, all of us coming together to change those rules together, because none of us can do it alone. There's a military term. It's called being beat in echelon, and that's where they beat you a section of the army at a time. Lee in the Civil War was a mastermind at beating the Federals in echelon. That's what we've allowed to do to us. And I'll give you the most recent example. When the right wing came after Acorn, a lot of us sat on the sidelines saying, gee, that's terrible, but secretly saying, man, I'm glad it's not me. And so whenever they started after Planned Parenthood, we said, no, you did that once, we made a mistake, we're going to stand together, and we're all going to defend one another so that we can go forward together and change the rules together. That's what we plan on doing, growing ourselves that way, reaching out, bringing in more workers through associate membership like Working America, partnering with the environmental community, the progressive community, and churches and other ways to be able to change the rules to create a climate where every worker who wants to join a union ought to be able to do it without being threatened to lose their lives or actually lose their livelihood.
Well, I've been able to cover a lot of the questions I had, but we have a highly informed and very articulate audience, and they've been kind enough to share a number of questions, which I thought I would pass along.
Great.
Recognizing that the country will soon be shifting to more people of color, what is the AFL-CIO doing to diversify the labor force?
Well, a number of things. First of all, we have a race commission going out right now to talk about race, because I personally believe that the labor movement can't be a B plus or an A minus, or even an A when it comes to dealing with race. We have to be an A plus. We have to be at the tip of the storm. And so we're starting that conversation to do that. Our apprenticeship programs. We're reaching out into the communities. We're in Ferguson right now. Most people don't know this. We have a thing called the Building and Housing Investment Trust. 2 different trust funds. We're going into Ferguson and we're building low and moderate income housing and going to relocate people, bring them back to that. And while we do that, bring in people from the community into our apprenticeship schools. Because here's another great secret, Maury. Most people don't know this. Other than the U.S. military, the American labor movement educates more people every year than anybody out there. No system does more than we do. So we're bringing them in. We found out in Ferguson that they had a tough time passing our entrance exam. So we're going back and we're doing remedial courses, giving them the writing skills, the math skills that they need to be able to get into the program so that they can get a career for life. We're doing that virtually across the country. We're also doing outreach and doing leadership training program. We bring in leaders at the regional level and at the national level. We train them for an entire year. To give them the leadership skills that they need to be able to get ahead, to win leadership positions, and to get elected in democratic organizations. So we're constantly pushing for that, and I'm very proud to say this, that the AFL-CIO, we lead by example. I think it's 78 to 80%, and I forget the exact percentage right now, of my department heads are women or people of color. Okay? One of our 2 of our officers, we have 3 officers, one's a woman and one's a person of color. And some people question what I am. Who knows? But we're really doing a lot of outreach and educational training to help our members get ahead, because our leadership should reflect our membership. You should be able to see people that look like you being the leaders of an organization, and the labor movement can't be at the back of that parade. We have to be at the front of that parade.
And another question from the people in attendance. How do you envision the labor movement changing as we move to a more service-based economy?
Well, I think you're still going to need representation. The way that we represent people will probably change somewhat. The people who represent you will change somewhat. So we'll evolve. There'll be more women, more people of color in the process, in the hierarchy of the movement, and we'll have differing ways to represent people. It won't be some won't be the traditional ways. Some will be when you have to form associations to be able to bargain with employers. Or if you have 3 employers a day, maybe we'll provide the benefits to those people that workforce, so they come to us for benefits that are transferable from job to job to job. so that we meet their needs instead of somebody else. And that's what we're trying to evolve and figure out what they need right now.
Comment and question. It seems that business and finance have dominated the discussion and issues of labor and unions to the detriment of the middle class. How can labor unions and the middle class reclaim their place and strength and their voice in the sphere of public discourse, policy, and opinion?
Well, I think we've started doing that. I think we've started doing that by speaking up, by doing things like common sense economics and educating, by forming partnerships, strategic partnerships with other progressive groups, but mostly by educating and leading by example. Doing the things that we do every day and don't tell anybody about them, start actually telling people. Telling people how we bring people out of the community and give them a career in a training class or apprentice class until they become a journey person. And then afterwards we bring the journeyman out as well every couple of years to increase their skills. It's constantly telling the story and not letting us be told, painted into a picture. I mean, the right wing are great marketers. You got to admire them. They can paint you into any corner if you don't speak up. And you ever read the book What's the Matter with Kansas? It's an interesting book because Democrats live in fact-based reality. They don't. They create their own reality, and there's 3 of them. And by the time we debunk this one, they already have 2 new unreality realities out there, and we're chasing them around, debunking them, because we believe facts mean everything. I'm not saying we ought to deviate from facts meaning something, because I really do, but I think we got to market ourselves a whole lot better than what we've done and not let them tell the lies about us.
How is the AFL-CIO integrating and negotiating on behalf of immigrant workers and supporting their agenda? And as a side to that, how, and in terms of innovation, how is the labor movement using technology to try to organize and have a greater voice through the use of modern technology?
Well, we are using social media and data right now to be able to understand our members and workers better. I mean, in about 6 months, we'll have a database that we will know more about our members than anybody out there, including Procter & Gamble and Wall Street that does all the marketing, because of the type of information we're getting and what we're doing. So we really are making great strides when it comes to technology, using technology and applying it in campaigns, whether they're political, collective bargaining, or legislation. I feel very, very good about that. We still have, I think, a ways to go to define ourselves yet and how we're changing and making sure that the story and the narrative is constantly evolving to keep up with where we are. And I think we're not as good at that as we should, but we're working on it. We really are. We're working with different ways to tell the story and the narrative, and we're also looking at telling the same story. Because here's what the right wing is good at. You go on talk shows, listen to Lush Rumbaugh, and he'll say, did I say that incorrectly? He'll say something, and you go on 10 other talk shows, you hear the same phrases, the same words. They get their talking points for the day. Meanwhile, we're out here and there and everywhere. So we're looking at having a core message that gets woven in and gets spread. You're starting to see some of our unions, the IBEW, talking about excellence on display every day. They're the best skilled workers in the world. Non-union people can't compete with the skills of IBEW journeymen. Cannot compete with them. And now we're starting to say that. We're starting to say that about others. So we're spreading the message in a whole lot of different ways, and I feel very, very comfortable that we are on the curve, on getting up to the top of the curve on the new technologies, social media, and data strategies along the way. So we'll keep going.
Yeah, and I think I serve on the Center to Protect Worker Rights Board of Directors, and it's just amazing the health and safety criteria that unions use to protect workers in the construction industry, which by far has the largest number of deaths and injuries. So it's amazing to see what they do to protect workers at the workplace and give them a voice in saying, no, we can't do that, or this is a better way to do very dangerous and difficult work, which labor really does. And that's sort of and that's an area of the last couple of years where the labor movement has increased in terms of its percentage of the workplaces in construction. So that's a real bright spot.
Yeah, there's a number of places. By the way, here's a question for you. How many people you think get killed on the job or die of occupational diseases every day? How many people think less than 10 every day? How many people think less than 50? How many think less than 100? Huh? 170 every single day. Now think about one thing. Think about this. 170 workers die from injuries on the job or occupational diseases acquired on the job. How many days would it be before the American public demanded action if 170 people were getting killed by terrorists every day? 1 day? 2 days? But industry can kill 170 workers a day, and there's not a squeak. Business as usual. That's outrageous. That's 170 families destroyed. That's 170 fathers or mothers taken away, brothers and sisters. We can do better. We can do better, and we will do better, I promise you.
Given the agenda that you've laid out in your talks and some of your comments, one questioner asked, why hasn't the U.S. labor organized a political party along the lines of the European Social Democrats and or the socialist parties?
Interesting question. I would say for about 40 years, we believed that we could blindly follow the Democratic Party, that they would take care of us. Didn't need another party. They would take care of us. And when you had people like Fitzmondale or Hubert Humphrey, a lot of that was true because they were friends. I mean, you didn't have to go lobby them. They looked at something and instinctively knew it was either good for workers or it wasn't. If it wasn't, they were against it. If it was, they were for it. Somewhere along the line, when money started polluting politics and Wall Street started buying their way into everything, the notion that we could blindly follow a party without being willing to kick them in the backside from time to time went away. Now, I'm going to be completely frank with you. I've talked about that. And some people have proposed starting a labor party. And the Executive Council of the AFL-CIO and the American labor movement currently lacks the will to create a third party. Because if you did, there would be some short-term losses. You would be pain. There would be pain at first. And at first, the Democratic Party would try to buy you back. And when that didn't happen, then they would try to punish you back. And they are afraid of that period of punishment. And so the likelihood of it happen is, I would say, slim and none, and slim's in South America.
Just going back to the question that you sort of focused on, the issue of technology.
You didn't ask me if I thought it was a good idea.
Well,
we'll
that's
come back to that.
Right.
another time.
That we can talk about that later. What about the role of the AFL-CIO in immigrant labor? You focused more on the technology, which is perhaps more immediate.
Well, first of all, let me make a startling revelation. I'm a first-generation American. My parents were immigrants. So it's an easy thing for me to remember all the slurs, all the things that were said about them, and my grandparents. And so we have been in the forefront of the fight to get comprehensive immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship. We do it. We do it, one, because it's the right thing to do, the morally right thing to do. And if that's not good enough for you, we do it because economically it is in the interest of every other worker to get them rights and protection so they can't be used to drive down your wages. So even if you don't want to do the morally right thing to do, you can do it in your own self-interest. We were the ones that pushed, and I mean literally pushed, the president to take DACA and DAPA and all the other actions that he's taken. We'll be at the forefront of defending that position now when it goes up through the court system. We'll be in that forefront because we believe that you can't raise wages for everybody in the country until you fix the problem, the immigration mess that we have. And it's not just non-skilled workers. Let me give you an example. Most people have no idea about this. They want to talk about undocumented workers, and I want to talk about the workers that come into this country legally for a second. They take an engineer from India and bring that engineer into this country and pay him $17,000. They're here legally. The engineer doesn't hold the green card. The green card is held by the employer. The first time the engineer says, I think I ought to have a raise, they whack him and keep the card and bring in another engineer. Skilled people coming in at too low a rate, and it's driving down the rate of pay for every American. So in the last bill, the compromise that we had, we negotiated a provision that said anybody they bring in under H-1Bs or H-2Bs or H-Cs at that time had to be paid market rate or the prevailing rate, whichever is higher. And the worker got to keep the card. So that if I go to work for somebody and you tell me to work under bad, ugly conditions, I say, I'm not working here, I'm going over there. And I can actually have some portability and some bargaining power. And we had that. I mean, it didn't get through the House, but we got it through the Senate. And we will get it done. And we will pass comprehensive immigration reform because it is good for every American, and fixing the mess that we call immigration system in this country and drags down the wages for everybody really does have to come to an end. And the only way you can do that is have a pathway to citizenship so that every worker out there gets full rights and can join a union and can be part of the Little League and can be part of the church and can ultimately vote in elections to make the rules that affect their lives.
Healthcare has been a big issue going back quite a ways and perhaps in the future, and it may be a big issue in the current political climate. One question is, would it not make sense to move to a singular payer healthcare system so that we can control healthcare spending and put more money into wages?
Absolutely. I mean, look at every country that has it. They get better outcomes for less money. Everybody's covered. Absolutely.
As an amendment or as an extension, currently there's an issue with the Cadillac tax. And I know those of us who are in the faculty and a lot of labor members have negotiated very good healthcare systems. How do you see that playing out?
I think we're going to repeal the Cadillac tax and make it more sane. Because what happened, let's start with the notion, we've been fighting for comprehensive health care for 100 years, the labor movement has. For 100 years. We've been at the forefront of that fight. So the idea of passing Obamacare was so that more people would have health care, right? More people, not less people. So here's what's going to happen here in a few years. Our plans that we've negotiated are good plans. I resent the fact that they call them Cadillac plans. I really do, because when you talk about rich people, they can never have too much health care. But when you talk about working people, well, we get a Cadillac plan, you ought to be taxed for that. We get too much health care according to them. That's BS. I cleaned up my act there. So here's what's going to happen. We have a health and retirement fund, and we got an employer that works for us. Now, let's say that employer has 100 employees, and let's say 10 of them are eligible for the subsidy. We tried to get the administration to say, give the subsidy to the health care plan that is providing that person with the health care. No, said they, we have to give the money to the person directly, which means those 10 people have to come out of the plan. Now because 10 people are out of the plan, our employer isn't providing everybody with health care, and he gets taxed. He has to pay into the fund to cover everybody. In addition to that, you give somebody who is hurting for money the subsidy. And they can buy health care, or they cannot buy health care. Some of them will, but some of them won't. And that means of the 100 people who are getting health care, fewer than 100 people will get health care. Now, in addition to that, our employer has to pay the $63 belly button tax, which means for every covered lives, our plan has to pay $63. In addition to paying into the fund that's there. And then on top of that, the Cadillac tax will charge us a 40% excise tax. So if your health care costs $1,000 a month, it will now cost your employer $1,400 a month. And our employers can't pay the lug. They will end up, fewer people will have health care. The goal of the whole thing was for have more people to have health care, not less people. And this will result in less people having health care. And we think a 40% tax is unreasonable. You take a CEO says, I buy my own health care. Well, hell, give me $25, $30 million a year, I'll buy my own health care too. Not a problem here. I won't come to you for health care. He doesn't say he gets taxed half of what we do on carried interest. Stock gets capital gains, and we get taxed through the nose. But he wants us to pay the 40%. Well, he skips. So it's auguring against the overall idea that the plan should provide more people with health care. We'll get it straightened out. We'll work through it. We're not going to let them repeal it because it's a step closer to where we need to be, and where we need to be is single-payer health care in this country.
Question that you've touched on, but one question I think that a lot of, especially students, might be interested in, is that in the 60s and 70s, the major unions alienated a generation of political activists by staying out of and sometimes working against social justice movements, such as civil rights, women's liberation, and the environmental movement. What are today's unions doing to avoid the mistakes of the past? And what more can be done to appeal to the new generation of social activists?
I think we just have to constantly change. We have to constantly communicate and find out what their needs are. We didn't care what their needs were. Here's what we have, here's what we provide. It's like when you need a four-wheel drive and somebody says, I got this bicycle, here, take the bicycle. I need a four-wheel drive. I know, take the bicycle anyway. That's what we did. So right now it's continuing to constantly find out what their needs are and experiment. Find ways to meet those needs, find different delivery systems, different educational systems, and I think we continue to grow that way. Because I don't think any of us can just wave a magic wand and think that things are going to stand still. I mean, you're going to face robotics. We're going to face all kind of things in the future where fewer and fewer people are going to be, in traditional employment type situations. And so if we don't figure that out, we go by the way of the harness maker. And we're working hard to figure it out right now.
Well, one question that everyone has been dying to know and that you can answer very clearly and unequivocally. What kind of motorcycle do you ride? Is our last question.
Harley Heritage Softail Classic. Black on black.
Well, I want to thank you very much for taking all, and especially the last one. The Harley being union made. So thank you very much for an outstanding presentation and willing to take a very large and diverse set of questions. And thank you most of all for coming to the Humphrey School and presenting a very important point of view on social movements and social justice in the U.S. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.
Before we, can we also thank, let me also just thank Maury Kleiner for hosting this gathering as well. And what a fascinating conversation. And you need to say what you feel, though. I mean, I think you're holding back a little too much.
I know I'm really shy and introverted.
But please join us all. Join me in again thanking President Trumka, Maury Kleiner for a really fascinating conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.
Excellent.
Great job.
Excellent.
Appreciate it.
Oh, that was fun. Are you joining us for dinner? Oh, okay. That's great.